I'm Ron Strickland. This webcast is one of a series in which I'm presenting some brief lectures and commentaries on topics from the courses I teach in literature and cultural studies. This particular installment is one that I have prepared as an introduction to a course called Studies in the Novel. And here I'll lay out some preliminary terms for understanding the novel as an object of study. First, let's look at some dictionary definitions of the novel as a literary genre. Here's one from the Encyclopedia Britannica. The novel is an invented prose narrative of considerable length and a certain complexity that deals imaginatively with human experience, usually through a connected sequence of events involving a group of persons in a specific setting. And here's one from Wikipedia. A novel is a relatively long work of fiction, typically written in prose and published as a book. The present English word for a long work of prose fiction derives from the Italian novella, for new, news, or short story of something new. Itself from the Latin novella, a singular noun use of the neuter plural of novellus, diminutive of novus, meaning new. There are some important distinctions suggested in these definitions. First, this emphasis on the new. The novel is a work of fiction. It's invented. It is something newly made up. Of course, there have been invented stories going back thousands of years. What's new about that? Well, another distinction is that the novel is written in prose, not in poetic verse. In the Western tradition, we have the classical epics, and in other world traditions, there are also epic narratives. But these epics were products of oral cultures, poems celebrating the exploits of great heroes, memorized, passed down from one bard, one singer to the next, and sung at important ceremonial occasions, performed for a live audience, a community, not like the novel designed to be read by an individual in isolation. And this distinction between the individual audience and the communal audience extends to the main character of the narrative as well. Unlike the mythic heroes of classical epics, a typical main character of a novel is an ordinary person, an individual, not much different from you or me, an individual facing challenges that any of us might face. A typical kind or subgenre of novel in which all of these features are evident is called the Bildungsroman. Bildungsroman is a German word having to do with the process of a young person learning about life, growing, maturing into adulthood. If you think about it, this subgenre, this kind of novel, continues to be very popular into the present day in works such as J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. The pattern of Bildungsroman can be seen more or less distinctly in all of the novels that we'll be reading in this course. These distinctions I'm making between the traditional epic and the modern novel, for instance, on the one hand, the communal focus and function, the public performance of the traditional epic, as opposed to the private, isolated individual reading of the modern novel, or the focus on mythic and warrior heroes of the epic, as opposed to a focus on ordinary individuals as protagonists in the modern novel, are not merely distinctions of personal taste or changing fashions. They are changes in the form and function of narrative discourse that reflect social, political, and economic changes occurring over 2,000 years or more. I've discussed these factors at length in another series of videos on the conditions of modernity. The novel emerges as a particular art form along with the conditions that produced the rise of individualism in Western societies, the rise of cities, of urban culture, the Protestant Reformation and its emphasis on Bible reading and a direct relationship between the individual and God, mediated through the reading of the Bible rather than the direction of a priest, as in traditional Catholicism, for example. The growth of literacy after the 16th century and the wider distribution of printed text made possible by Gutenberg's innovation of movable type and the printing press. All of these developments were important to the emergence of a new kind of narrative, the novel. A key feature of the modern novel, as opposed to classical epics and other forms of narrative, is a technique in which the audience not merely sees what a character is doing, but is given access to the character's inner thoughts and feelings as the action unfolds. This feature is distinctive to modern fiction, and its term is interiority. The effect of interiority is, of course, related to isolated reading, as opposed to groups forming together as audiences to hear live performances. Through this effect of interiority, we as readers may feel so closely, so intimately connected to the protagonist that we are living the experience ourselves, living the experience along with the main character. In this way, the novel is actually a very democratic form. Rather than praising the great hero, we are involved in the heroic action ourselves. So, my focus on the novel is on the novel as a distinctively modern phenomenon, a distinctively modern discourse. It's a new kind of narrative that emerges after the 16th century. And I would identify, for example, Miguel Cervantes' Don Quixote as the first modern novel. But for the English novel, scholars recognize the works of Daniel Defoe, such as Robinson Crusoe, or Samuel Richardson's Pamela, or Henry Fielding's Tom Jones, all written in the middle part of the 18th century as the first English novels. The main characters of all of these novels are ordinary individuals. The emphasis on ordinary individuals as the main characters or the protagonists of novels, and ordinary situations as the settings for their narratives, extends significantly to female readers. And indeed, in some quarters in the early 19th century, novels were seen as something for women to read, especially. Along with the growth in the audience of female readers, there's a steady growth in female main characters and of female authors, though many of the early female authors had to resort to publishing anonymously or publishing under a male pseudonym in order to have their works produced. We'll be exploring these features of the modern novel, as well as other related topics and issues throughout this semester, as we read novels by Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, Jean Rhys, Joseph Conrad, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Toni Morrison. But for now, I'll conclude this webcast. As always, if you have questions or comments, send me an email.